nyonjeje morso da ningmi zongzong chimbu nga biat bakar tarngam zando shurmar do orton ba tje chanla ki shang ne chen ro zeng jang zeng jawar tu ji shan lo yelan ji me panzo za la sora do gon ti to ban bo ro shinji lo.
The unsurpassed, profound, and wonderful Dharma's difficulty encountering dealings of aeons. I now see it here to receive and uphold it, vow to fathom the Tathagata's true meaning, to liberate all beings, thus generate the supreme bodhicitta. Let us continue our class on the wish-fulfilling treasury. Beginning from today, we will start the classes on the 12th chapter of the wish-fulfilling treasury, which is on the vast teachings. This particular chapter can be difficult if we were to discuss it extensively, as this chapter mainly discusses the Dharma teachings, or rather the teachings that need to be further discerned. So it has two aspects. First one is the heretics' teaching, and then the second aspect is about the Buddhist teachings. Within these two categories of teachings, we need to discern with our wisdom. And Longchenpa over here explained quite extensively about the various heretics' teachings. In fact, in the Treasury of the Philosophical Schools, there are teachings about the heretics' teachings as well, but not as extensive. When we look at the title, the Treasury of the Philosophical Schools, we feel that this is where Longchenpa would discuss more about the heretics' teachings, but I'm not quite sure why Venerable Longchenpa would discuss more of the heretics' teachings and philosophies in the wish-fulfilling treasury. Many of you probably think that, well, we're all Buddhists, why do we need to study what the heretics' teachings are? We are not going to attain accomplishment by relying on the heretics' teachings. But I think it's essential for us to understand the view and the philosophy of the non-Buddhist teachings, their practice and their actions and the fruition that they would receive and they can attain. Because those are the teachings I'm sure many of you had studied either in your previous lifetime or in this lifetime, but in the early time of your life. And some of you, if you do not know about the heretics' teachings, then you may even give up on Buddhism and then pursue the heretics' teachings. So, first of all, we need to understand the difference between the heretics' teachings, the Buddhist and the non-Buddhist schools. Some people may argue that according to the Vinaya, we're not supposed to study the heretics' teachings. The Vinaya teachings points to if you were to have the intention to abandon the Buddhist teaching but to adapt the heretics' teachings, that is not permitted. However, if we were to have the intention to study the heretics' teachings without influencing our own view, but to understand the perspective of the non-Buddhist schools in order to liberate them, to help them, in order to rebuke with them, in such a way, the studies of the heretics' teachings could be very necessary. This is our first time studying the 12th chapter. It is necessary for us to study it in great detail. But if I were to expound it in great detail according to the auto commentary, then it could take a very long period of time. And due to the time constraint, I would simply go over the teachings from the shlokas. Whenever we have opportunity later on with the causes and conditions being matured, then I would like to give you more of the detailed teachings and explanations on the 12th chapter. Mipa Rinpoche, in fact, composed an explanation and a commentary on the 12th chapter. that explains particularly on the 12th chapter, but I didn't have time to translate it. For a long period of time last year, I was in retreat to translate the Wish-Fulfilling Treasury as well as the practice manual to the Wish-Fulfilling Treasury. The title of the practice manual is called the Diamond Treasure. After I finished translating them, the causes and conditions were matured for me to come back to Larungar. If I were to have more time, I would probably translate it, the brief explanation of the various schools according to Mipa Rinpoche. The great masters of the past place great importance on Mipa Rinpoche's composition on this explanation, especially Khenpo Deba, Khenpo Chokcha, as well as Phontsok Rinpoche used to quote a lot of teachings from this particular commentary. So it's definitely very important. For such a reason, whenever we have an opportunity later on, I think it is quite important to study the various kinds of perspectives of the non-Buddhist schools. I really want to explain it more in detail because I think nowadays we see so many different kinds of schools and different kinds of philosophies, different kinds of religions and views and perspectives, but all of them can be included in the 20 types of erroneous views as well as 62 types of views or the 360 types of views. All the current other non-Buddhist schools and religions as well as schools of thoughts and philosophies can be included in the above stated categories of views and perspectives. As a Buddhist, if you don't have a very solid view yet, then if you don't understand the heretic's view, you could be wavered into it or being persuaded into it. This is because you haven't developed a solid view yet. It is not to say that you shouldn't study it or you shouldn't enter into their studies either. It is to say that you need to be persistent on your own view at the same time as studying other views. Nowadays, we have different kinds of parties. For example, there is the conservatives, there is the Republicans, and then Democrats, and then community parties. All of those worldly parties and philosophies would uphold a particular principle. It is not to say that if you uphold a particular type of philosophy, you should not study the other philosophies and the other perspectives. It is the same for the Buddhism teachings. After you've already entered into Buddhism, you should also uphold your own principle. Similarly, in the worldly sense, to further expound my perspective, once you entered into a company or entered into a particular type of class, you already enrolled in that class, enrolled in that school. And if you want to transfer from that school, from that department, from a certain company to a different one, then it would take a long period of time for you to do so. It's not that easy. On top of that, it is not necessarily beneficial to you. So it is not that Buddhism is narrow. It is not that Buddhism teachings are conservative. In fact, all of the different religions and different perspectives would only praise of their own teachings. But if we were to truly making observation with our wisdom, you can see that it is not promoted by ourselves, but the whole world would praise that the Buddhism teaching is the best and the most inclusive. And I think that is very true as well. If I were to make great explanations of this particular chapter, it's going to take us a few numbers of classes to cover the content of the 12th chapter, and I would not be able to cover it within one or two classes. For that reason, I am going to briefly explain to you the different names and the different kinds of views associated with other schools. some of the philosophies and some of the schools of religion only are explained by a name, but we don't really know their view, practice, and fruition. Other than some of the very well-known heretics, such as the six heretics teachers, there are the explanations of their perspective. There are some detailed explanation, but other schools, I'm not sure. We're not very clear about them anymore, whether they're still existent or not. Now let's look at the actual teaching over here, which includes both the brief explanation and then the extensive explanation. Of the brief explanation, it says that now it is time to talk about the Dharma that is chosen, which covers all of the teachings within Nirvana and Samsara. By making the choices of accepting and rejecting, we are going to expound on the two, that is, the inner teaching and the outer teaching. Previously, we've already covered on the characteristics or the qualities of a qualified teacher, and then the qualities of a proper disciple. After that's already been decided, now we need to know what is the Dharma teaching. That is the key. What is Dharma? It includes a vast array of different knowledges. For example, science, for example, Qigong, and even the worldly crafts and designs and trainings. From a more bigger perspective, you can call all of them as Dharma. As in Hindi, as in Sanskrit, it is called the Dharma. Dharma means all kinds of teachings, which has a connotation of designs as well, or upholding something that we can understand through our knowledge, through our wisdom. And then after you understand it, then you can make the choices of either accept it or abandoning it. So there are the three aspects of the meaning associated to the word Dharma. Whenever we talk about Dharma, we sometimes would refer to it as uphold, or in worldly language, we call it as rules or regulations. It could include many different meanings. Now, in terms of seeking for the Dharma, what is the Dharma that you need to seek? If you don't know what the Dharma is that you need to receive, then you could very much tread onto the erroneous path or erroneous teachings. Then in such a way, the fruition would not be what you sought for. There are the two types of dharmas, two types of teachings, one associated to samsara and the other one associated to nirvana, that we need to uphold, we need to accept, and the teachings associated to samsara we need to give up and abandon. In the teachings such as according to Tantra of Bright Lamp, it says that out of all the teachings, the mundane and transmundane, the transmundane is the most supreme. To the sentient beings like us, it is the most important to choose the Dharma teachings that would lead us to transcendental wisdom. There are all kinds of philosophies and schools and teachings between not awakening to full awakening. To summarize it briefly, we can include or we can divide the teachings into two categories. One is the inner teachings, which is the Buddhist teachings, or outer teachings, which refers to the non-Buddhist teachings. According to the Kalachakra, it also states that the teachings would have the two categories, the outer and the inner. If we were to further discuss the range in the middle, then it would be very vast. We're not saying that all of the outer teachings are all of the wrong views. We are simply differentiating the outer and the inner. That is similar to a worldly sense, that there are the ones that lives domestically, and then the kind of people that lives abroad, and the kind of people that lives inside the village and outside the village, or inside the house and outside the house. And over here, we're simply referring to our own circle of understanding, that is Buddhism teachings as inner teachings, and then the non-Buddhist schools as outer teachings. According to the textual outline composed by Mipa Rinpoche, he then divided the next part of the teachings within 12th chapter into two parts. The first one is the outer teaching or the non-Buddhist schools, and then the next part is the inner teachings. That's the Buddhist teaching and Buddhist philosophies. We are not going to get into the second part of it because the Wish Fulfillment Treasury has been divided into two volumes. So we're going to look at the brief explanation and then the extensive explanation of the outer teachings or the non-Buddhist schools. Over here it says that out of which the first outer schools, the 6 heretics teachers upholds the view of a self, 62 erroneous and 360, 11 categories and 5 ideas. These are the few different ways of dividing the outer schools or the non-Buddhist schools' teachings. This particular verse is a brief explanation, and then in the later part we will look at the more of the ideas studied by the non-Buddhist schools. Over here, the first category is the non-Buddhist school teachings held by the 6 heretics teachers. The 6 heretics teachers that debated with Shakyamuni Buddha and then lost in the debate. That's the first category. Then the second category is the kinds of schools that upholds the view of a self, upholds the Sakaya Ditti, the view that's related to accumulation of perishable things. Over here, it didn't really particularly explain the names associated to this particular school or persons that associated to this particular view. And then the third one refers to 62 types of erroneous views. Now the fourth one is 360 non-Buddhist schools. The fifth one is that 11 specific schools. A few minor changes in the Chinese translation.
贵寺啊，就是含摄一切的论义无派啊，就是最后那个是含摄一切的这个论义无派。
Five philosophical ideas that upholds or that includes all.
那么引导呢，就是了解就是这6种。
These are the 6 particular types of non-Buddhist schools. So whenever other people ask you how many different kinds of non-Buddhist schools are out there, then you could explain to them that there are 6 major categories. Or all of the non-Buddhist schools can be categorized into these 6. Because when we look at the non-Buddhist schools, some of them would uphold wrong views. Because of the wrong views that's inscribed in the teachings of theirs, they would then not treading into the correct teaching, which is the major issue of the non-Buddhist schools. Sometimes it is because of the environment, sometimes it is because of the teacher, and sometimes it is because of the content of the teaching, which would lead to people studying them not coming to the realization of the truth. While the teachings would lead them to get further away from the truth, then all kinds of wrong views started to generate. That is the permanent view and the nihilistic view. Altogether, there would be 360 or 96, and all kinds of numbers would be associated to the non-Buddhist schools. At the time of studying, I am not necessarily going to explain to you all of the points stated in the auto commentary, but I do wish that each of you would read carefully of the auto commentary so that you can make further analysis and more detailed analysis. In such a way, you can see how Venerable Longchenpa sometimes would debate with the other schools from the ultimate view, from the empty perspective, and then sometimes Venerable Longchenpa would debate with the other schools with the opponent's point of view, and sometimes Longchenpa would debate with them according to or using the methods of inference and logical analysis. And sometimes he would use the examples. There are various ways that Venerable Longchenpa used to debate with the others, which would lead to the opponent agreeing with him. At the time of reading into the auto commentary, I encourage you to read into the opponent's point of view and contemplate upon it, and then think about what kind of angle you would debate with the others, or what kind of angles you would uptake to debate with the others. And then in such a way, you will be able to truly study the other views and the inner schools or the Buddhist point of view. At the time of translation, I really felt that this is such a wonderful text that we should all study. In fact, I grew up in a religious family. However, it was quite a frightful time. During that time, the neighbors and family and the relatives would uphold the view and the perspective of Buddhism. So I had never truly been influenced by the non-Buddhist teachings. But many of you indeed grew up in that kind of environment that would you would get lots of influence of the non-Buddhist schools. So you have not truly developed a certainty of view of Buddhism. At the same time, if you do not understand the view of the non-Buddhist schools, and then you could have the possibilities of encountering the teachers of the non-Buddhist schools, and then study different views at a different period of time in your life or in different atmosphere, then for a short period of time, since your view of Buddhism has not been completely solid yet, and then you could be very easily to be wavered to or to be converted to the non-Buddhist school. So there's such possibilities. So I hope all of you who are sitting here don't get too confident about your view, because you are currently living in this environment that supports the Buddhist view. Other than those of you who are above 60, you probably won't change anymore, because how could you change your monastic robe to a Taoist robe? For people who are under 60, would you have such possibilities? Because we can't be sure. There are so many changes that could happen. It is impermanent. So let us look at the teachings over here. It is quite necessary to further make analysis of the non-Buddhist schools. Now we're going to look at the 6 aspects that's stated over here. The first one is the 6 heretics teachers, and the second one is the 20 of the Sakaya Ditti views, the 20 schools or 20 philosophical schools that holds the Sakaya Ditti views, and then 62 type of views, 360 schools, as well as 11 categories, and then the 5 ideas. Those are the 6 parts we're going to discuss. The first one is the 6 heretics teachers. The 6 heretics teachers, in fact, debated with the Shakyamuni Buddha during his time. So the Buddhists are quite familiar with them. For example, the time we have the Dharma assembly of the Dharmarajas are during the time of the month of miracles according to the Tibetan calendar. And it is called the month of miracles is because the Buddha debated with the 6 heretics teachers in various cities. The Buddha had defeated the 6 heretics teachers through debating with them, and This particular month and festival is to commemorate the victory of the Buddha. The particular teaching had been expounded in the Sutra of the Wise and the Fool. So let's look at the verse over here. It says that the 6 heretics teachers, including the Purna Kashyapa, Makali, Goshala, the Ajita, Paduka, Niganta, and Sanjaya. All of those 6 teachers, which upholds very long, different names. Sometimes the names could be a little bit different, but the names are quite long. Since around that time, it was matriarchal society, and they would uphold the names of their mothers. Shariputra, for example, also Madhikalayana, all inherited the names of their mothers. So Putra was rather quite a common name. For example, the heretics teacher, the Nataputra or Shariputra. So lots of those putras. Now the Purna Kashyapa, Makali, Goshala, Ajita, and then Pakuda, Sanjaya, and Niganta. Some of the names are used over here, and some of the names are not included here. These 6 heretics upholds different views, but the majority of them do not acknowledge the previous life and the future lifetimes. Even some of them do acknowledge the previous and afterlife, but their view is rather quite strange. You probably remember that we've studied those views in the 3rd chapter of Vimalakirti Sutra. In the commentary, there are quite detailed explanations how the 6 heretics teachers were expounding and so on and so forth. There is a teaching, a story of Ajatashatru. The Ajatashatru, the king, also had a close relationship to the 6 heretics. We've talked about it in the Sutra of Contemplation, where the king Ajatashatru tortured his father, King Bimbisara, to death in prison. It was because the king Ajatashatru was very much closely related to the 6 heretics. In that sutra, we studied that the king Ajatashatru, after murdering his father and gained the position of being the king, he was very much burdened by the guilt of killing his own father. So he went to different places in India and sought for teachers who could give him teachings on good and evil. He, in fact, asked the 6 heretics teachers to give him teaching on good and evil, and he was unhappy with the teachings all of the 6 teachers give him. And then with the introduction by Jiva, or in fact, the Dr. Jiva then introduced Shakyamuni Buddha to the king Ajatashatru and said that the Shakyamuni Buddha would be able to explain the good and evil to you. And then Shakyamuni Buddha was invited to the palace to give the teaching to the king Ajatashatru. And then the Buddha asked Ajatashatru to repeat the teachings of the 6 heretics teachers to him. We can see that the memory of the king was really good. So he complied and repeated each of the teachings to the Buddha. And then the Buddha gave the teachings to Ajatashatru. It was definitely, we can see that the memory of him was really wonderful. That is probably why the Indian people are quite popular to be hired by lots of the tech companies because they have lots of good memories and they're very smart. Anyhow, Shakyamuni Buddha then explained the teachings of good and evil to the king Ajatasattu, especially on the teachings of the cause and fruitions. King Ajatasattu then took refuge to Shakyamuni Buddha and fully complied with the teaching. I think we've studied it in Vimalakirti Sutra as well, but the extensive story was taught in the Shramanapala Sutra. It was quite in detail, and I think this sutra was more popular in the Theravada traditions. Also, it's translated into Chinese language. I think you should read into it, especially the conversations between King Ajatasattu with the 6 heretics. Also, how he received the genuine and true answer from the Buddha. Anyhow, over here, let's look at the teachings of the heretics. The first one is the teaching from the Purnakashapa. He thinks that the past life and the future lives, as well as the karma, the causes and fruitions, including the fruition of arhathood and the fruition of bodhisattvas, the different bhumis and the pure manifestations or the pure lands, the Nirmanakaya, all of those are not existent. He thinks that everything is just like space. There is nothing that is truly existent. If we were to use the now language to describe the philosophy of this teaching, is rather the amoralistic view, which denies any of the good karma or the punishment for bad deeds. There is no punishment for negative deeds. This is rather very inferior philosophy. But back around that time, this particular belief was rather quite popular. Now, the second one is the Makali Goshala. The names can be a bit different. This particular school states that creating positive or the negative karma is without any causes and fruitions. Let it be defilement or liberation. None of them needs any particular kinds of causes and conditions. Neither does liberation. It simply happens without causes and conditions. In the now language, it is called the fatalism. People would believe that there is a fate without any cause nor conditions. Everything is simply permanent and changeless. That was the second view. Now, the third view is by Goswami or the name of the philosophy is Ajivika. The view is rather quite similar to the previous two. Some says that this particular view would state that all sentient beings would be able to attain liberation after 84,000 great kalpas. But I think this particular description is a bit different than the Parinirvana Sutra, and the teachings in the Mind Mirror is also different. The quotations, that is a bit different too. I think sometimes there is a little bit of a mix-up in the different views associated to the different names. But I think it could be because of translation or mix-up with the names. Anyhow, the view is rather quite clear. This particular school claims that there is nothing that is perfectly good or perfectly evil. rather they uphold a view of doubt to everything. So nowadays there is another term to it that's called agnostic.
第四个的话呢，就是这个就是什么这个粗义派，就是粗义
The
派也好，
fourth
或者说
one
是这个
is
法赫义
the ones that
他们呢
would
一般
wear
是
the
就是经常
coarse
穿的一些
clothings
粗糙的衣服，
because
跟我们
this
出家人一
particular
样的就是那个
school
愤扫义，就是
and the followers would wear
还有他们经
the
常
very
大头
tethered
发，
clothings.
不能穿那个干净的，就应该。然后他们
Also,
说
they
是一
would
切都
pull
是
their
用
hair
时间
and
来
they
决
don't
定的。
really
时间这
wear
个成
very
熟的时候呢，我们经常说
clean
速
clothings.
挂落地吧，就是这样的。时间没有到的话，那就是什么都没办法。
This particular
出现
school
其实他们有些说法是好像有道理啊，但是他们不承认
speaks
什么因果，
that at the time
就因和
of
果的这种变化都是不承
at
认
the
的。
time
他们
when
说
the time
任何的
comes,
这种苦
then
和
things
乐
would
也好，
happen.
一切的
In
话呢，
some
就是
ways,
比
it
如说
sounds
过了
very
什么这
similar
个八万
to
四
the
千年
view
呢，就
of
是或者是
Buddhism, but
过了什
they
么时
would
候的话呢，
not
就是不
agree
管是
to
你依者也好，
the
智者
causes
也
and
好，凡是
fruition
这个
and
都
do
按该解脱
not
的就解脱了，
agree
就
to
是
the changes
就各
of
种这个说
the
法，但
changes
是
that
这个
could
呢，就是
happen
实
to
际上
causes
是
and fruition.
也是这个
So
不对
people
的，
from
就
this
是因为
school
这个
states that
这种这个
let
说
it
法
be
呢，这
happy
个也
or
是
sad, let it be
不
the
合理的，
foolish
因为我
ones
们
or
这
the
个通过
wise
观察
ones.
的话
After
呢，就是
84,000
其实有
years,
些时
one
候
would
的话
attain
呢，就是并
liberation.
不是这个全部都是事件来
So
定
of
的
course, it
啊，
is
就是
not
中间呢，就
appropriate.
是都有
It
这
is
个
not
各种各
a
样的这个变化，
reasonable
就是虽然你说是时间
a
是这样的，但
reasonable
是呢，就
philosophy.
是
When we
就
make
还是有
observation,
很多的这种变化，就是所以
we
我
can
们
see
现在的有
that
些说法来
not
讲呢，就是他们
everything
是跟那个顺势歪道啊，
can
就是
come to a
就是
fruition
比
with
较这个
the
相反的。他
time.
们有些说是这个呢，也可以
There
叫做
could
是
be all
快乐
kinds of
派的啊，就
changes.
一切都是享受就可以了。凡是该解脱的时候该解脱，该这个痛苦的时候
Teaching
痛苦，
that
就
is
是我们
stated over
去
here are
去
very
路里没有什么
similar
这个
to the
多大的
materialistic
用处，
view.
他们的这种真正的观点呢，就是比如说我们这个修道的话呢，就是也是就是不
Because
需
they
要就
would
是通过修
proclaim
道
that
来
we
这个
just need to
毁灭我
enjoy
们的这
whatever
个烦恼，
happens,
就是
and
只要这个时间到了
when it
就
is
自然
time
这个
to
成就啊
attain
等等，这
liberation,
么
we
样这
would
个说法。
definitely be able to attain liberation. We do not need
他们还
to
有一个内容的话
seize
呢，
our
这个世界上还
afflictions
是一个
by
很实有
practicing
的
on the
东西。
path.
比如
As
说
long as
你们
we
也承认
wait,
就是什么
as
这
long
个
as the time
就
is
佛陀就
matured,
是实
then we
现这
would
个身
naturally
边的这
attain
个月呢，
liberation.
就承认一种忌日啊就或者是佛陀成道日的话呢，你们也是
Also,
承认是这
there
个，
is
当然这个是可
another
能荷兰的这个派啊，荷
argument
兰的这个
from
他们
this
的基层
particular
人就是
school.
这
They
样
would
说的。
state
但我
that
们要跟他们回
time
答的话呢，
is
就是我
a
们并
solid
不是认
existence.
为呢，就是时间呢，就是
For
是固有
example,
它
if
才
you
就
were
是
to
造
say
作
that
就是
the
它造作
Buddha
的。
that
因为我
manifests
们虽然是这
in
个
that
纪念就是比如
manifested
说佛陀的成道日
miraculous
和身边人是
activities
是
to
这样
tame
的，
the
但
six
这个呢，就
heretics
是实际上
teachers,
是通
and
过这个
that
怀念就
particular
是佛
month
陀的
is
这个
auspicious
功
month
德，
or
然后依
auspicious
靠自己
day.
的这个信心，各方
So
面的因缘具足的时候呢，
they
就是
would
那种
argue
这个
that
善
if
事呢，
you
就是
were
越
to
来
say
越
that
增
there
长
are
的，并
auspicious
不是
days
是
for
有
the
一个
Buddha
常
to
有的
attain
这个事件呢，
enlightenment
就是在
or
这里给我
auspicious
们
days
操
to
控，然
commemorate,
后他
then
呢，就是给我们就是
they
就
would
是一切
agree
都是由
that
他
the
成
time
为
is
作者，
solidly
不是这样
existent.
的，所以这种这个说法呢，就
But
是应该是
we simply
也是
would
是
use
这个
those
不合理
times to
啊，就是这样
commemorate
的。
and
然
to
后第五个的话
remember
呢，就
the
是就刚
merits
才
of the
讲的
Buddha,
啊，
but
就
we
是
do
嘎达
not
子
agree
也叫
that
做是这个
the
奴隶法，
time
就是他
is
们的观点。
truly
他们的观
existent
点的话
or
呢，就是也需
the
要就是
time
认为是
in
这个
fact
互信的。
are
但是呢，
manipulated and
就
created
他们是
by
怎么
a
讲的呢？就
certain
是说
type of
我们
school
不
or
是原来呢，
philosophy.
就是说那个就十四无记法，就是十
Now
四
the
无记。
fifth one, the fifth particular philosophy,
找到了一个新的眼镜，但是
I found a
稍微
new
动一下就
pair of
头就晃了。
glasses today, but it doesn't
像
seem
凌晨一
to be
样。
fitting me
所
because if
所
I
以
were to move a little bit, I feel quite dizzy.
嗯，可能讲课的时候是头一直动着，
Moving or not,
不
I
动也
feel
好像不在
quite
晃。
dizzy, just like car sick.
以前是我们有这个十四无记法嘛，就是十四
In
无
fact,
记
there
法，
are
可能歪道就是
14 questions
就问了，
that's
就是这个时间
unanswered
呢，就是
or
是
the
有呢，就是是没
undeclared
有。
questions
然后
by
有
the
二者
Buddha.
呢，就是非有非无，就是
Those are
就
the
这非
questions
两
that the
者，就是
Buddha
这
do
个
not respond
就这个
to.
是我们这个事件是有
But
方面
this
的这
particular school would ask about whether it exists or not. In fact, there are the 14 questions. Is this world eternal or not, or both, or neither? Is the world permanent or not, or both, or neither? Is it is self identical with the body, or is it different from the body? Does the Buddha exist after death or not, or both, or neither? So those are the 14 unanswered questions. According to the wish-fulfilling treasury, in fact, there are 16 questions instead of 14. Inside the wish-fulfilling treasury, there are 2 more questions. That is the body the same as life, or of other than the life? Is this body permanent or not permanent, or both, or neither? The heretics would ask for a certain answer to those questions. So the Buddha is rather quite skillful, and he would not give an answer of certainty, because if you were to say that they are constant or they're permanent, then there could be impermanent associated to it as well, or the other way around. For such reason, the Buddha would very skillfully not to answer those questions. For example, take our body. If we were to say that the body is permanent from the angle of the finest mode, then our body cannot be permanently existent. And similarly, you can make analysis from the angle of time that it is also impermanent. From the micro angle, then there is no permanence to the body. But if you were to say the body is impermanent, we would state that as a practitioner, the body that you had yesterday and the body you have today and the body you will have tomorrow would be different. But we would have this grasping to hold on to the body as the same. So if we were to explain to the opponent in such a quick time, they would not be able to understand. For such reason, the Buddha would then not answer those 14 questions or 16 questions. And to this particular heretics, they do not understand what emptiness is. And if they do not truly exist, if there is no foundation for things to truly exist, if you do not answer the questions of such foundations, then what's the point of answering whether there is a wall on top of foundations and the patterns that's associated to the wall? So there is really no need to answer such kinds of questions. This particular school makes argument very much based on their particular feelings. If they were to feel that things are permanent, then they would argue in such a way. If they feel that they're not permanent, then they would argue in that way. So their particular claims are very much based on their own view and their own imagination, their own perspective, without any detailed observation. So it's rather quite simple. Now the 6th one, the school of Jnatiputra, this particular school considers that the karma from the previous life is quite important. It takes a great important role in creating happiness and suffering in this lifetime. However, they do not acknowledge the karma that can be accumulated in this lifetime. Isn't that strange? Because if there is the karma accumulated from the past, but there is no karma that's going to be accumulated in this lifetime, so there is no karma in the future. For example, if a person were to be born as a mute, doesn't matter how much this person would accumulate virtuous karma, such kinds of result cannot be changed. Or if you were to say that you got ill and this illness is happening to you because of the previous karma, so any kinds of virtuous deeds such as chanting the names of the Buddha won't work on this. This is probably how people would think nowadays. If I were to have headache and then ask the Sangha to chant mantras and sutras for me, to rededicate merit to me, my headache would still not be eased, because this is the karma accumulated from past life and cannot be changed in this lifetime. So when Longchenpa makes the refutation of this particular view, he then talks about, does your body and your mind, is your body and mind of one entity or of other entities? The creator of the karma of the future and the past, are they the same or not? So he would ask questions in such a way. This particular school is very similar to Jainism, because they would proclaim that whatever happened in the past becomes a cause and condition to whatever happens now. And it's very similar to the materialistic view as well. But then they would not consider that whatever we're creating could be the cause lead to the future fruition. The materialistic view can be very similar. Whenever we see someone, someone who committed a crime, for example, why this person created karma or did this evil deed? What kind of punishment would this person receive in the future? We would ask them such questions, but people belong to this particular school of philosophy, they would not make analysis in such a way. They would not say that whatever you're creating now, the kinds of vice karma would lead to suffering fruition in the future. They would not make such analysis. And the teaching is very similar to the now Jainism. There are lots of debates and refutation of this particular view, so you can read into the auto commentary. In the Shastras of Nagarjuna, also he made refutation as well. You can look into the commentary. Now, the second set talks about the 20 types of the Sakyaditi view, the view related to the accumulation of the skandhas. And we had already debated and refuted these 20 in the Madhyamika Avatara. Over here it says that the form and so on, the 5 aggregates, I would abide, I would give rise to them as well as master over them. This particular view, in fact, are very much related to the 5 aggregates. If you studied the Madhyamika Avatara, the teachings over here is a little bit different than that is mentioned in the Madhyamika Avatara. Just for a few of the places, majority of them are the same. According to some of the schools of philosophies, it would state that each of the 5 skandhas would uphold a self. For example, the skandha of form is me, and the skandha of sensation is me, skandha of perception is me. And then some schools would proclaim that there is a self abiding on top of each of the skandhas. For example, there is a self that experiences happiness and suffering, and then there is a self that is currently having different mental activities, and there is a self that has perception. So there's a self associated to each of the skandhas. And then there is another school that proclaims that there is a self abiding on top of each of the skandhas. And then another school proclaims that the self would produce, it is because of the self-grasping, then it produces the skanda of form, of perception, of sensation, of mental activity, and of consciousness. On top of that, there is another school that proclaims that there is a self that could master all of the skandhas. As you know that there are the 20 types of views that holds onto the Sakyaditi. If we were to make detailed observations, it is actually quite easy to refute all of them. If, for example, I were to be the skandha of form, that is definitely incorrect because there are all kinds of impermanence associated to form skandha. It is arisen because of various causes and conditions. And then the next one says that if you were to be the one that abides on each of the skandhas, that is not possible because there is a subject and object, so there is no such kinds of possibility. And then the next one, if we were to produce the skandhas, then you have to make the observation, when was it produced, how is it produced, and so on. After making observation, that doesn't work. If you were to be the master of the 5 skandhas, that is definitely not an appropriate explanation, because if you were to be able to master the 5 skandhas, then you would be able to master your look, your appearance, your form, and your happiness and your sadness. In such a way, you would be able to master yourself so that you don't get angry, and then you can master yourself so that your form won't get aged, and you would be able to stop getting older and master your physical body to stay at the age of 20 or 30. What's the best time of a person? 31? I think 61. At the time of At the age of 40, people usually would feel that at the age of 30 is the best. And then when people are 50, then they would feel that 40 is great. So at the time of getting older, people tend to envy and admire people who are younger than them, or at a younger age, rather. So, as you can see, that we would not be able to master our form. According to the Prajnaparamita Sutra, it says that I am not all the skandhas, and there is not a self within the skandhas. There are the various explanations and teachings given in the Prajnaparamita Sutra. It says that there is not a self within the 5 skandhas, and within myself there are no 5 skandhas, and the 5 skandhas are not controlled by me, and so on and so forth. According to the Madhyamika Avatara, there are teachings similar to it as well. Within it talks about the 20 types of the Sakyaditi view that can be considered as the high mountains of the Sakyaditi. If we were to destroy them, then we would encounter no problem of attaining selflessness. The next one talks about the 62 types of views, which can be divided into 2 large categories. The first category is the ones that's associated to the previous moment, and the next one is to the next moment. According to the Long Agama Sutra, it talks about the 18 types of views that's associated to the previous moment, and then the 44 types associated to the later moments. So this is not just a teaching that simply summarizes the Tibetan Buddhism. The 18 types associated to the previous moment usually would hold on to the thought of the past. These 64 types of views, in fact, all fall into the view that would be unreasonable. And because of such wrong views, their minds are completely false, because they would use their false view to see and even to beautify the world they perceive. That is quite pitiful. As we stated earlier, there are 18 types of views that's associated to the previous moment, and then according to the different categories of it, there are 5. There are 4 types of views that's associated to permanence, and 4 to nihilistic, and then 4 that is associated to no extremes, and then 2 without causes. So there are 18 altogether. Later we will, in the commentary, it talks about the refutations of them. And then the 44 types that's associated to the later moments, which can be divided into 5 categories as well. The 16 of them associated to with thoughts, and 8 without thoughts, and 8 with and without thoughts, and then 7 nihilistic, and then 5 types of nirvana view. Altogether, there are 18 plus 8 plus another 8, and then 7 and 5, that's 44. All of these views, I hope that you can read into the auto commentary, especially on how these views are stated and how they're refuted. I think the auto commentary doesn't provide too extensive of the refutation, but if you can read into it, you still benefit from the explanation. Again, I wish that you can understand each of the views, and then after that, you can try your best to refute them from your angle, and then read into the auto commentary. Now let's look at the 360 views that's stated here. The first one states that the ones that makes clothing with leaves, and so on. There are 120. The 3 times there are 3. By 3 times there are 360. These are the ones that constantly part from the correct path. The school that makes clothing out of leaves, that is a particular school of philosophy. When I went to Africa and went to the different places, India and Europe as well as United States, I really feel that the sentient being's karma is unfathomable. The various schools in Buddhism can be considered as a minority comparing to all kinds of different teachings in this world. While there are a variety of other teachings, when we look at the teachings on the past, future lives, as well as the present life, also the manifestation and the ultimate teaching of the truth, in such kinds of aspect, Buddhism is indeed quite incredible. Though that there are lots of different schools that can be dabbed into or spread it into various kinds of religion, philosophy, folk beliefs, and things like such. All of those thousands and tens of thousands of philosophical schools and teachings definitely far exceeds that of 360. But these 360 types of schools that's expounded here are the majority of the teachings that's quite popular back then. The first particular school is called the school that made clothing out of leaves. And then there are 120 teachers within that particular school. Those are the ones that created this particular perspective. And then if we were to calculate it with time of the past, present, and future, then there are 360. That's how it is calculated. Out of all of them, there is not a true path that leads to liberation, because the majority of them either holds the view of permanence or nihilistic view. For such a reason, they would still wander in samsara, and the beings would indeed are quite pitiful. I've tried to look for the names and then try to translate it, but I couldn't find any dictionary that talks about the views of the heretics. So it's quite difficult to find all of them. Anyhow, the 360 associated to the 3 times, a part of them belongs to the school that believes in permanence, and the other one to a nihilistic view. It is just like, according to Bodhisattva Charivatara, when it comes to having debates with the ones having the permanence view and the nihilistic view, it's very easy to debate with them and refute them. At the time of study, whenever we have the possibilities, for example, within this particular discussion, there are all kinds of forbidden activities, such as holding the activities of the ox and of beasts and all kinds of them. If we were to understand the different activities of the particular religion and belief, we would definitely be awe-stricken by the various kinds of karma of sentient beings. As a Buddhist, it's quite important to understand their teaching, at the same time to develop wisdom to refute those teachings. There was a story of Master Xuanzang when he was studying in Nalanda Monastery, and there were a group of the heretics from the Lokayata school challenged him, asked him 40 questions, and stated that if you can refute my 40 questions, then I can decapitate myself, the heretics stated. But at that time, Master Xuanzang asked one of his disciples to answer the questions and won the debate. The monks at the Vikramashila Vihara, the monastery, were asked to be witnesses in that debate. And then after a long debate, the heretics completely lost. After losing, he said that, well, I am going to cut off my head and make that as offering. And then Master Xuanzang said that as Buddhists, we do not harm sentient beings. You don't need to cut off your head as long as you follow as long as you study with me, then that is fine. So we can see from this story that there are the heretics debated with the Buddhists. After losing, they would surrender and become the disciples of the Buddhists. There are stories as such, but from my speculation, usually the stories are told differently by two parties. It is the same in every part of the history between countries and between different ethnics. They all tell different stories. So we can see that there are lots of the victory stories within Buddhism, but how can we know if they are true or not? I think we can see that the Buddhists would win the debate by understanding that our view that's presented is definitely far surpassed that of the others, including the view of past and future life, the karma and causes and fruition, some of the common views and some of the uncommon views are definitely far surpassed of the others. So, as Buddhists, we need to be prepared to debate with all kinds of wrong views that are existent in this world. In the past few days, I also mentioned that nowadays I see that there are some Tibetans post online stating that they have doubts about past and future lives. If we were to further make investigation of their particular claims and particular theories, we would be able to see that they have not truly understood the teachings within Buddhism. They have not studied the teachings of past and future lives. Though they spend their whole life in debating with such ideas, but they have not truly understood the idea yet. So they would proclaim all kinds of philosophy that may sound right, but are not grounded. If one were to truly delve into the profundity of Buddhism, then all of those kinds of so-called inference that they present would not be reasonable. From the surface, the way they presented the ideas can be quite seductive. But if we were to truly look at the teachings that they present, they are not reasonable. However, not many people would delve into the profundity of Dharma first. That is why these kinds of people presented wrong views would gain lots of followers. That is why we, as Buddhists, need to develop a certainty in our view according to Bhikkhu certainty. This is quite important to develop a view that is not wavered by the others. Or according to the ornament of Madhyamika, it says that we should develop the view that cannot be taken or robbed by the others. Without such certainty in the views, we can see that there are all kinds of views and teachings and philosophies existing in this world. So we need to develop a certainty in the view.